Hello there, my name is Andrew Needham. I'm a professional services engineer at Jamf, where I've worked for a little over 3 years. The past 18 months of that, I've been working on migration workflows between mobile device management or MDM platforms. The Jamf Professional Services team provides services and solutions to help our customers succeed with Apple. This could be anything from performing a health check of their Jamf Pro environment to building a white glove zero-touch onboarding experience or writing scripts to help solve complex management problems. One of the more frequent requests we get is for help migrating between MDM platforms, often from customers who want to progress from Jamf Now to Jamf Pro. Whilst the focus of this presentation today is on a migration from Jamf Now to Jamf Pro, much of what we'll see is applicable in its high-level concepts to any MDM migration. Now, for an overview of what I'm going to talk about today. I'll start by comparing Jamf Now and Jamf Pro, not only in terms of their capabilities, but also the ways in which they differ structurally in their approaches to MDM. There can be quite a bit to adjust to when making the move, so you'll ideally have a working knowledge of Jamf Pro before you start to use it in production. We'll talk about how important planning is in the migration process. It's critical that you prepare and have a good understanding of what you need to provide your end users with to enable them to work securely and effectively. One of the most effective ways of doing this is to map out user needs and build timelines to help you complete your migration. Then we'll take a look at the migration process itself. This involves recreating the content from Jamf Now into Jamf Pro and looking at workflows for device migrations. Note that I'm making a distinction between content and devices. By this, I mean that the apps, the settings and configurations are considered content, whilst the Macs, the iPads, and the iPhones on which that content will be installed are the devices. Finally, we'll wrap up covering some post-migration tasks, a few words of wisdom from our experience, and also where you can go to find out more about Jamf's service offerings. Before we go any further, I'd like to stress that Jamf Pro is not always going to be the better solution for all organizations. You should pick the solution that suits you best. And if it happens to be a move from Now to Pro, then this presentation contains some useful information and ideas on how to do that. Please don't take away from this presentation that you should all be looking to migrate. Jamf Pro does take a lot more knowledge and time to use effectively. Just ask yourself, which solution, Jamf Now or Jamf Pro, would suit your needs and your goals most effectively? So, aside from moving the content and devices, there's quite a bit to get your head around when migrating to a new MDM platform. Let's compare Jamf Now and Jamf Pro to help frame some of those differences. With Jamf Now, we get device management basics, Pro, enterprise level management. Jamf Now is great for managing those basic settings. Perhaps your organization doesn't have the resources to hire a dedicated employee to handle IT. Jamf Now is accessible, it's quick to learn, and will ensure that those basic settings like passwords, encryption, and networks are configured, as well as giving you simple methods of deploying work applications to devices. Jamf Pro is the industry standard framework for managing Apple devices at any scale. However, this level of customization and complexity comes with a requirement to learn how to make use of it effectively. In order to get the most out of Jamf Pro, you really should have a dedicated employee or team of employees with Jamf Pro experience and qualifications. With that, you'll be able to manage an Apple fleet of any size effectively and use any enterprise workflows required. In line with this simplified approach to MDM, Jamf Now makes use of blueprints. Blueprints can contain both macOS and iOS or iPadOS devices. Each blueprint contains all of the settings and applications which the assigned devices should have. Many of the settings and applications in blueprints will be compatible only with macOS or iOS and iPadOS. In these instances, Jamf Now will give each assigned device the appropriate apps and settings for its operating system. The process of assigning devices to blueprints is done at enrollment or manually through the Jamf Now web interface. The approach in Jamf Pro is rather more complex. Firstly, computers, macOS devices, and mobile devices, iOS or iPadOS devices, are managed almost entirely separately. Secondly, instead of starting with a monolithic construct like a blueprint, which handles settings, applications, and device assignments all in one, we use scoping to combine targets, limitations, and exclusions. This can include dynamic or smart groups. Jamf Pro benefits from a more granular approach, which will give you a finer degree of control over the way the devices are configured. Jamf Now makes use of Apple's MDM framework. This limits its functionality to that which Apple designs and builds into their operating systems. Apple's MDM framework, whilst very good, does have a few areas in which it's perhaps less effective. That's where the Jamf binary comes in. Jamf Pro makes use of the Jamf binary to collect more detailed inventory data, to run scripts, install packages, and a host of other handy functions. The Jamf binary can also be configured to run when triggered by various events and has more complex timing and frequency options. Jamf Pro makes use of the binary in conjunction with Apple's MDM framework. This makes it a more effective platform for certain enterprise-level workflows. Jamf Now does not natively support running shell scripts. Although there are workarounds, such as adding a script to a package, neither does it support the installation of unsigned packages. Jamf Pro fully supports running shell scripts. It can be very handy to achieve all sorts of workflows which are not explicitly covered in Apple's MDM framework. You can also install DMGs and unsigned packages. Jamf Now has limits in how far it can be customized and the ways in which it can interact with other platforms, as it lacks an API. Jamf Pro can be almost infinitely expanded and customized using a robust and well-developed API, along with an ecosystem of Jamf Marketplace apps and services. The limit really is your imagination. So, why migrate? Some of the more common reasons for needing to migrate to Jamf Pro from Jamf Now are perhaps an organization has experienced significant device or employee growth. Where a business needs to manage many hundreds or thousands of devices, Jamf Pro just scales better. Jamf Now is more commonly used by small to medium-sized businesses, and we're talking perhaps tens, hundreds of devices in those situations. Perhaps there's a need for more granular control of devices. Jamf Pro excels at giving us a tool set that can be configured specifically down to particular devices or users, more so than Jamf Now can. Blueprints will only get you so far, and they can be hard to manage when you have a lot of differing configurations and a need for dynamic scoping. Many organizations require more detailed reporting and inventory data, either through the Jamf Pro interface itself or by connecting via the API to a SIM. Jamf Pro can facilitate this and give organizations a greater awareness of what's going on in their Apple fleet. And finally, perhaps organizations may need to implement a workflow that's not supported by Jamf Now, such as needing to run scripts or install unsigned packages. Sometimes these workflows are required for more advanced endpoint security or VPN software deployments. One thing I can't stress enough is that you should give yourself time to plan, test, and adapt. Where we often encounter difficulties with migrating customers, it's almost always because they're trying to do too much in one go, or they don't have hardware to do their testing with. Take time to plan. For example, you may run into some sort of rare edge case relating to network connectivity or challenges around software licensing in your environment. Planning helps us to identify these potential pain points and navigate around them. You should test, and test again, and then test some more. When you have your plan in place, try it out on devices where there's nothing at stake. Take some test devices, configure them in Jamf Now, and practice your migration workflows. Not only will this help iron out any problems, it will also make you more relaxed and comfortable when dealing with any challenges that may arise during the migration. When you've completed your testing, pick a pilot group of tech-savvy users to help you out with a dry run. This way, if something goes wrong, you have a manageable and amenable group of users to work with, rather than having to deal with the entire organization in one go. An often overlooked factor is communication with your end users. The nature of migration workflows are that they will cause some level of disruption to your end users. You need a few minutes of their time to help us make the move. So you could perhaps build a narrative or a story around the migration to Jamf Pro. Make the end users feel like they're helping the organization out by doing their part. You give them a compelling reason why they should take some time out of their day to help the business and their colleagues alike. You'll probably have a much easier time. On screen now, we have an example of a planning timeline. These kinds of documents can be very helpful in getting cooperation and buy-in to the project from executives or from colleagues. It can also be a really helpful way for you and your team to visualize your progress and ensure you've completed all of the prerequisite steps before continuing. This particular one splits things out into 4 different phases, and each will list the critical tasks for a given phase that need to be performed, along with an estimation of how long it will take relative to the other tasks that are on there. It's a very good way of ensuring that you do the critical items before moving on to the next ones and helping to visualize that. Before we continue any further, I'd like to address the elephant in the room. Why can't Jamf do this automatically for us? Well, after all, Jamf Cloud customers, we're hosting your data on our services. Could we not just move that data somehow and do some network magic to make devices trust the new MDM certificate? It's not to say that we'll never offer this kind of service. However, there's some very large hurdles to doing so, which makes the manual workflows more desirable on balance. The way that Jamf Now and Jamf Pro format their databases is quite different, and both are in constant development. It'd be really tough to programmatically map everything from Jamf Now to Jamf Pro on a continuing basis. We'd also have to make a number of decisions about the way that we think these things should map that maybe make less sense to you and your team. As we've already covered, there are many structural differences and differences in approach in the ways Jamf Now and Jamf Pro work with MDM. The Jamf Now way of doing things doesn't necessarily translate well to Jamf Pro. Perhaps even more importantly, if we were to move content on your behalf, you're still going to have to learn how to use Jamf Pro. The process of migrating the content is an excellent opportunity to learn how to use Jamf Pro in an organic way and to help adjust your expectations about how you're going to be managing your fleet moving forwards. Our experience has been that migration services with integrated onboarding are the best, the quickest, and the most successful way to get our customers migrated and up to speed with Jamf Pro. Since the release of macOS Big Sur, we can no longer programmatically install MDM profiles on devices, on Macs specifically. This means that the end user has to be involved to install the Jamf Pro enrollment profile. And on iOS or iPadOS, if we want to avoid wiping the device, we require end users to perform a user-initiated enrollment. We'd rather let you make the choices in terms of which is the right workflow for your organization and ensure that you find that right balance of security and preserving the end user's experience and their data. Some additional things that we should consider when planning our migration. There is a possibility of the loss of applications and settings during the migration. App Store apps and configuration profiles that have been deployed from Jamf Now may be removed from devices. This could result in the end user not being able to access some applications or receiving system messages about system extensions, transparency, consent, and control prompts, or being disconnected from company networks. During the period between removing the old MDM profile from the device and installing a new one, the device will be unmanaged. Ideally, you want to try and minimize this time window as much as possible. And at Jamf Professional Services, we've developed workflows to help address this and automate this workflow. Ultimately, there is going to be some level of disruption for your end users. Typically, we need them to install the MDM profile when requested. It should only take a few minutes, perhaps 2 at most. However, we will require their attention for a short while at least. So, we've gone through some of our planning and preparation steps. We're going to talk more about the actual migration process itself, so we're actually ready to make the move now. So we're going to start off by preparing our Jamf Pro environment. This involves, but it's not limited to, the following steps. Going to want to have a look at the Teammates menu in Jamf Now, so where your users currently allowed access to your Jamf Now tenant. And you get those same users set up in Jamf Pro so they can continue to access the Jamf Pro server. You may want to set up different levels of permissions for those users depending on their job function and what they should have access to. You may want to configure single sign-on settings in Jamf Pro, and this will allow you to integrate with a single sign-on provider such as Microsoft Azure or Okta, and that allows you to further secure logins and enrollments to your Jamf Pro server. You'll want to configure the user-initiated enrollment settings, the self-service settings, and also other key settings in Jamf Pro. You'll need to configure a new Apple Push Notification Service or APNS certificate, an automated device enrollment or ADE token, and a volume purchasing or VPP or apps and books token. And this is going to ensure that all of Apple's enterprise services will continue to work correctly. After you've configured an automated device enrollment token to link Apple Business Manager or School Manager to your Jamf Pro instance, you can configure a pre-stage enrollment in Jamf Pro for computers and for mobile devices to ensure that you've got somewhere to receive any devices that are migrating using that method. You should create a separate MDM server in Apple Business Manager or School Manager for this purpose and move those devices over in ABM or ASM. For your apps and books or your volume purchasing, you'll want to create a new location in Apple Business Manager or School Manager to transfer licenses to. This new location will have its own volume purchasing token, which can be integrated with your new Jamf Pro server. This will ensure that we don't have any problems arising from using the same volume purchasing token in more than one MDM server. You'll also want to create configuration profiles in Jamf Pro based on the settings from your Jamf Now blueprints. It's not always the easiest thing to do, as not all of the options and settings, names and positions match up. However, I've done my best to prepare a comparison sheet of the main settings in Jamf Now and where you might find those settings in Jamf Pro. You see the handouts for the session. This information is correct to the best of my knowledge at the time of recording. In short, configure your Jamf Pro server so that it's ready to receive and host your devices migrating from Jamf Now. Make sure it's in a state you're happy to have devices enrolled in it. So to help us keep track of which users are assigned to which devices, to which blueprint a device was assigned, we can leverage a feature in Jamf Pro called Inventory Preload. We can export a complete list of devices in Jamf Now, and then we can grab a template for Inventory Preload from our new Jamf Pro server. The table on screen now illustrates how we're going to map the information between the two. So after we've mapped that information, we can take the CSV file that we create there and upload that into the Inventory Preload menu in Jamf Pro. And then when devices enroll into Jamf Pro, they will consult this CSV table and pull information from there to put into the Jamf Pro database. So a couple of things to call out that are in this table here. The OS platform, that will translate from iOS or iPadOS across to mobile device. Our term for those in Jamf Pro. For a computer, we've got Mac OS, that would translate over to computer. You can also see there's a column there for blueprint, and in Inventory Preload, that maps to EA blueprint. The EA blueprint field is an additional one we can add to the end of the template, in the final column at the end of the existing template items. And this is going to allow us to pre-fill information into an extension attribute, and it's going to allow us to keep an eye on which blueprint a device has previously been assigned to in Jamf Now. So I mentioned extension attributes there. These are super handy little things in Jamf Pro which are going to allow us to store additional pieces of data beyond our normal database fields in Jamf Pro. As I mentioned in the last slide, we can pre-fill this information by using Inventory Preload. So before we upload our Inventory Preload data, we're going to need to create an extension attribute called Blueprint for both computers and for mobile devices. It's best to create this as a pop-up menu and populate the pop-up menu with all of the potential names of our blueprints. And this will act as a means of reference to what devices were assigned to which blueprints when they come over to Jamf Pro. So if you're not quite ready to move away from the concept of blueprints just yet, we could create a smart computer group or a smart mobile device group in Jamf Pro, and that could then use the contents of that blueprint's extension attribute as a criteria. and this can help to bridge the gap whilst we move from Jamf Now across into Jamf Pro. One of the things that you need to get your head around when moving from Jamf Now to Jamf Pro is the different ways in which we scope content and apps to devices. Jamf Now's approach is monolithic. Several big blueprints with each one containing all of the apps, the configurations, and they're all bundled into one object. Blueprints are static, that we assign devices to them, but they can contain both computers and mobile devices. Jamf Pro takes this concept of a blueprint and splits it out into its granular components. Apps and configurations are deployed separately and potentially dynamically using smart groups. Scoping is potentially a lot more complex, and computers and mobile devices are managed separately. So let's have a look at that in practice. I'm going to try and visualize some of the differences between blueprints and our scoping workflows by looking at a few diagrams here. So we'll start off in Jamf Now here. We have a blueprint that's to deploy an app and a configuration profile here. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to add our Macs, Andrew's Mac Pro, Andrew's Mac Mini, and we're going to add our iPhone, Andrew's iPhone there. So because they've been included in the blueprints, they are all going to just receive whatever's applicable to them from that blueprint. In this case, all the same app, all the same configuration profile. Really nice and simple. So blueprint goes in there, gets all the stuff that it's supposed to. Okay, now let's look at an example of scoping from Jamf Pro. So we're going to be scoping a network configuration profile here. We can already see it's a little bit more complicated on screen here than the example given for Jamf Now with blueprints. So instead of this one big monolithic construct of the blueprint, we've got everything separated out. So you can see up the top left there, we've got the network profile. We've got our devices down below that. And then over on the right, we have a visual representation of our scoping. Within that, we've got a couple of smart computer groups in this case. So we've got all managed clients, and we've got macOS Big Sur, which is a group that I created before that includes any computers running macOS Big Sur. So just to go through scope, with scope we have targets, we have limitations, and we have exclusions. Simply put, targets get the scoped object. Limitations limit which of those devices in the targets receive the scoped object. Exclusions do not get the scoped object. Exclusions override limitations, which override targets. So in this example here, we're going to target all managed clients. So at this point, we're just looking at the targets, that's everybody. But we're going to exclude that group that contains any computers running macOS Big Sur. And that is going to result in our MacBook Pro there, which is running macOS Monterey, receiving the configuration profile, but our Mac Mini, which is running Big Sur, does not. So this is also dynamic in this case. So if our Mac Mini upgrades to Monterey or indeed to Ventura, Monterey even, the next time Jamf Pro collects inventory, it will send an update and it will distribute that profile to the Mac Mini. We're also going to go through an example here for mobile device scoping as well. So we'll run through this again with iOS and iPadOS. And this time we're going to deploy an app, which we can see up there in the top left. In our scoping visualization here, we've got our groups of all iPhones, and also model is older than iPhone 8. So within our targets this time, we know already that the iPad isn't going to receive that app even. But we have our exclusion there that includes models older than iPhone 8. So in this case, 10S receives that particular configuration. So there's a few visualizations there for scoping and blueprints just to help underline some of those differences. Now that we've covered the basic setup of your new Jamf Pro instance, we're going to focus on how you ensure your users retain access to their App Store apps. In the planning stages, you should have mapped out exactly which apps your users need. At this point, we're just talking about apps you would intend to deploy from the App Store using volume purchasing. So you want to make sure you've created your new location in Apple Business or School Manager and ensure that you have sufficient licenses assigned to this location. If they're free apps, there's no harm in getting a few extra. You then want to ensure that all devices which need to have those apps are scoped to receive them. in Jamf Pro, however you choose to do that. And then when the devices enroll into Jamf Pro, they will then be assigned those apps. And we're going to minimize that cutover period and any disruption to the end user where they might not have access to those apps for a short time. And if we want to reference which apps in Jamf Now are assigned to which blueprint, we can navigate to a particular blueprint and we can go to apps and have a look at the list of apps there. Whereas the approach from Jamf Pro, we're going to go into the computers, or we're going to go to the devices tab. In this example, we're just looking at computers here, up in the top left corner of the dark gray area of the screen. And we're going to navigate either into the Mac apps menu or the mobile device apps menus. And then remember, of course, as I say, the Jamf Pro separates out this functionality. So where we may see all of this stuff together in Jamf Now, we're going to see it separated in Jamf Pro. There may be some apps that you're deploying in Jamf Now which have not come from the App Store. In this case, you should make a list of those apps and look at either app installers or look at using a policy to deploy a package or a script to install that application. App installers are a relatively new feature, and they provide you with a very simple way to deploy and automatically update specific applications using workflows and technologies which are provided by Jamf and supported by Jamf. If your app that you want to deploy is on the supported list of app installers apps, I typically suggest you use that route. It's a really nice, just easy button. You can say, want to deploy Google Chrome or Microsoft Outlook, and Jamf Pro will then handle that for you. For anything else, though, that's not in that list, we're going to have to manage that installation ourselves. And that means uploading a PKG file to your Jamf distribution point and creating a policy to deploy it, or potentially scripting that workflow for deployment as well. You then ensure that any of the devices which need to have that package or that script installing on it is going to be in scope of the policy. So we can think of the policy as being the delivery mechanism for that scope or for that package file. So if you want to have a look in Jamf Now, again, we come back to the blueprints menu. We're going to be looking at apps. So you can recognize those custom apps for Jamf Now Plus customers. The icon for it looks like a cardboard box with a block of butter in it. So you might spot some of them in there if you've got any third-party apps or custom packages that you've had to deploy for certain pieces of software. In Jamf Pro, we can upload one of these PKGs, or we can put a script into Jamf Pro. We do that through the computer management menu, and then we would deliver that using a policy. Right, now it's time for our settings. Now we've covered the apps. Configuration profiles, they tend, for the most part, to cover important device settings which could relate to networks, security, or user experience. You're going to want to go through and review your blueprints in Jamf Now and ensure that you have configuration profiles set up in Jamf Pro to match. So the handout I referred to earlier, you can make use of that to assist you in that task. Lots of security tools will require the deployment of system extensions or PPPC payloads. That's privacy preferences policy control. Try saying that 3 times in a row. This may be one of the reasons why you're migrating. If you have any system extensions or PPPC payloads deployed through Jamf Now, they will be in the form of custom profiles. We recommend being granular in approach in Jamf Pro. Try and limit each new configuration profile that you're building to 1 payload, unless there is a good reason not to. And also avoid sending clashing device settings. If we send a device 2 configuration profiles with contradictory information in it, then we're going to have a bad time. You want to make sure that any of the devices which need to have a given configuration profile would be scoped for the given configuration profile. So we're going to use the macOS passcode payload as an example here. We can find the settings that relate to that in our blueprint and then in the security section. And then over in Jamf Pro, we're going to go to Computers and Configuration Profiles, where we can select the passcode payload from the left-hand side of the lighter area of the window. And then we're going to try and go and make sure that our settings here in the image reflect as closely as possible those who are in Jamf Now. So, after all that's done, we should have ourselves a Jamf Pro environment that's ready to receive devices. So we should be happy that any device that's then enrolled into Jamf Pro, it's going to get all the settings, it's going to get all the apps that it needs to. Depending on how you enrolled your devices into Jamf Now, they may have different kinds of MDM profiles installed on them. So if a device was enrolled using open enrollment, the profile will be removable, whereas if a device was enrolled using auto enrollment, the profile will be unremovable. So what does that mean for you? Well, removable devices can be removed on the device, as you might imagine. Unremovable ones, however, can only be removed by sending a command from the device's MDM server or by wiping the device. So if we have removable profiles, what do we do? So if a removable profile, we can remove it on the device on macOS by navigating to the System Preferences app, opening the Profiles pane, and selecting the profile called Jamf Enrollment. You should then be able to hit the little grey minus icon selected in red in the bottom left-hand corner of that window to remove that profile. It'll ask you to authenticate with admin credentials as well, so just need to make sure that you are an admin on the machine that you do this on. And then on iOS or iPadOS, we can navigate into the Settings app, go to General, VPN and Device Management, and where we can tap the Remove Management button to remove the profile. We'll remove that. If we have an unremovable profile, our only option is to send a command to unenroll or to erase the device. We can do this through the Jamf Now web console by selecting the device, clicking on the three dots in the top right-hand corner to bring this drop-down menu up here. And then if we wanted to enroll, we can click on Unenroll Device to send the unenroll command. Or indeed, if we wanted to erase the device, we could choose Erase Device here. Okay, so that's how we get rid of the profiles. So that's all well and good, but we want to know, how do we get them into Jamf Pro? So we can do this through two main methods, either through user-initiated enrollment or automated device enrollment. For user-initiated enrollment, we can either have end users navigate to your Jamf Pro server's URL /enroll, where they can download and install a new MDM profile, or alternatively, you can email them a unique link to this page. You can have authentication by means of your single sign-on provider or by using a Jamf Pro user on here. If you send an email link, you can choose to have it unauthenticated, and it is a unique link per user. We're assuming that only they have access to their emails in that case. The big disadvantage with this particular type of enrollment on devices is that this new Jamf Pro MDM profile will be a removable one. However, the big advantage is we don't have to wipe the devices or erase them. So this is often more commonly used on macOS devices, where losing local data is typically more of a problem than it would be with an iOS or iPadOS device. On mobile devices, they will still retain their previous supervision status. So all of the MDM functionality, which is reliant on a device being supervised, will continue to function after enrolling into Jamf Pro using this method. So if you absolutely must have an unremovable MDM profile, then automated device enrollment is the way to go. And the easy route for this is to make sure devices are assigned to the Jamf Pro MDM server that we created earlier in Apple Business or School Manager, and then send them the erase command. This will erase all the data on those devices to make sure if there's anything critical, it's backed up elsewhere. Then when those devices head back through Setup Assistant, they'll enroll straight into the Jamf Pro server. So this kind of workflow is often more common in educational environments where typically it is more of a security risk to have devices with removable profiles, or indeed where devices perhaps are a little bit less tied to a particular user, maybe the shared iPads and things like that. There is one alternative workflow for Mac, which allows us to run a terminal command to run the automated device enrollment workflow retrospectively after the device already has been set up and has a user. I'm not going to cover that in any detail, but I will mention it. So if you're in a position where you've got the old MDM profile of your Macs and you want to make sure the Macs have an unremovable profile, you can run the command sudo profiles renew -type enrollment. That will use the profiles binary to ping up to Apple's activation servers, check in with them, and then give them an unremovable profile if appropriate. Whilst you're going through the migration, keep communicating with your end users, send them progress updates. We recently had one of our customers who moved to Jamf Pro, and they gamified the process for their end users. So they offered them incentives for making those jumps early. They had some cool little plushies that they handed out, and they managed to migrate 2,500 devices in just under 2 weeks. So if they can manage it, then hopefully you can as well. Remember, most of your users want to do the right thing. So you're probably going to spend about 20% of your effort on 80% of the users. There's always going to be some machines that may be stuck in a drawer or a cupboard, or whose user is on leave, that maybe take a little longer to get migrated. So you can expect the migration to go very quickly at first and then slow down as you get to that last 20% or so of devices. Also, don't be afraid to adapt or change your plans. You can roll your experience back through into the process and try and be flexible. After your devices are into Jamf Pro, a few remaining tasks that we need to address. For encrypted Macs, we need to reissue file vault keys, and we can do this via a script, which will prompt the end user to enter their password. We can use advanced searches and smart groups to monitor the progress of this and of other key metrics for the migration. You want to check in with your users regularly and take on their feedback. And also, you're going to want to work with our Jamf customer success teams to ensure that you're limiting the time that you have to run Jamf Now and Jamf Pro in tandem. So we're here to help, and we want to support you in whatever way we can for that. So I couldn't resist taking this opportunity to plug the services team. As I've alluded to throughout this presentation, we do a lot of this kind of work. We've developed a number of specialist workflows which will automate a lot of this for both you and for the end users, and make it a much more enjoyable process for them. We also offer onboarding services as well to help accelerate your success with Jamf Pro. So if you would like to talk to us more about professional services for migrations, please speak to your Jamf Customer Success Manager, and they can put you in touch with our team for a scoping call. Thank you very much for listening.